flipping the table.
I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, Whole Foods Market, the Public Health Institute, and Roots of Change. Without their help, we couldn't present this podcast. Hello, this is Michael Reed Dimmock, and you're listening to Flipping the Table, a podcast featuring honest conversations and brief commentaries about the future of food and farming. I'm inspired by the thousands of farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, activists, and policymakers across this nation who are meeting the many challenges related to nutrition, poverty, pollution, and climate. This podcast highlights the people and actions making our planet and communities healthier and more resilient. I hope to inspire listeners to use their food purchases and their votes, our democracy, to flip the table in support of a new and better food system for us all, to be part of the delicious revolution now underway. I'm with D'Artagnan Scorza today, Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza, who runs the Social Justice Learning Institute in Los Angeles, Inglewood, and is also a professor at UCLA and a longtime colleague in the sweetened beverage tax wars. Someone whom I look to for guidance around how we should be approaching this thing to win, because we have not been winning for at least 5 years. Some will say much longer. So, D'Artagnan, welcome. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So we're reaching him down in his home turf down there because he's working, as he should be. And so we're going to try and do this conversation pretty quickly. But D'Artagnan, you've been working with us for the last 3 years to pass bills working with Assemblyman Bloom, and were instrumental last year in getting us through that first health committee vote. Really appreciate all your efforts. But I want to hear from you why you think we have not been winning and what we need to win.
Yeah, I think in many ways the, sugary sweetened beverage tax fight has boiled down to a few critical, I would say, issues, right? Namely, that we have not done the hard work we need to shift the narrative around sugar and its impact on communities and folks' bodies, right? That we have also not lifted up sort of a strong enough argument that takes into consideration the lived experiences of folk who would most likely be affected by such attacks. So, for example, if we were to increase, the cost of soda, and folk in communities who rely upon soda as a, primary beverage are impacted by that. They don't see a direct relationship between what that tax will do for them in their communities and what impact it would have upon their own health, right? So there's not a clear-cut connection between this tax and its return. What's the return on investment in communities?
Okay, so what you're just to make sure, you're saying that the message, there are two things. There's a sacrifice for them if they're going to pay a tax, right? There's a sacrifice. It costs them money, and it makes something that's bringing pleasure to their lives less available, less affordable. So you're saying that the message about diabetes is not been compelling enough, number one, and number two, the message about how people's lives would be improved by a tax is not coming through.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think when we consider how this debate has been shaped, I think, it is really centered on what folk who are sort of at the grass tops have wanted to see happen, right? I mean, it's we want a tax so that we can fund this, health initiative. We want a tax so that we can fund these other health concerns that we've been dealing with. But, but at no point has any of that really drilled down to the need that communities have, right? And really, the communities who will be most affected by such a tax have not been deeply engaged in order to shape, the message or to shape what that need is, right?
So let's talk about So it's clear what you're saying is we have to ground any kind of a campaign within the communities, and it has to be led by communities. That's what I'm hearing. So,
I think that's absolutely right.
okay,
Yeah.
so describe to me how you would do that. If you had all the money that you needed to get that done, what would you do?
I think to help ground that campaign, we would really rely upon some of the models that my organization, the Social Justice Learning Institute, has used in the past. When we first started this conversation with our community members around sugar sweetened beverages and access to healthy food, folk would come to us in certain spaces, in our community meetings, in our healthy lifestyle classes, but also in town halls and forums that we would launch. And they would say, look, I don't want to give up my burger. I don't want to give up my soda. Or, that's what I'm going to provide for my child as well. And, it was through those sort of community listening conversations that we came to understand what the multiple considerations were.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to lead a campaign, I would spend time really evaluating the narratives that currently exist in communities around things like soda and sugary sweetened beverages. I would spend time trying to understand where people are coming from, and then respond to the experiences that people have before structuring a larger campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I would also center sort of my campaign strategy around the power analysis, right? To really understand who influences these messages, who benefits by, who benefits because of the way the industry operates now, and begin to spend time with our residents to educate them so that they understand the effects of these beverages upon their lives, upon their health, upon the community, right? We would spend time educating people to build a base so that folk could help educate others,
mm-hmm.
And then mobilize others around this issue.
Mm-hmm. That's what they did in Oakland, right? Isn't that what they did in Oakland when they?
Absolutely right.
Berkeley,
I think that's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta understand where people are coming from first. So understand how this issue ties back into their own self-interest, and then spend time educating folks so that they can go out and mobilize their neighbors and mobilize critical message carriers to begin to shift narratives.
Okay, good. So, I know you are engaged in collaborating with the Praxis Institute, and which is the Praxis Project, pardon me, which is doing some of the kind of work you're describing. As many different campaigns that begin at the grassroots, resources are scarce. So the question is, can we, figure out how to get the money flowing to organizations like Social Justice Learning Institute and Praxis in larger volume so that we can actually get this off the ground? Because this would be a state, you live in the place that is, Los Angeles is the place where most of the resistance to the tax has come at the legislative level, because the legislators that represent those communities are feeling the pressure, right? They're hearing, like you just said, that power analysis illuminates how the beverage industry works with churches and store owners to spread fear around what a tax would mean. So you'd have to be able to counter that, and that would require you work with communities, but that requires a funding base. So do you believe, I want to hear from you about, how far of a reach do you think you could handle? What would be your capacity? Could you go beyond Los Angeles? Could you go south? Could you go north if you had the resources?
Yeah, I think that's very possible, very doable. Not only sort of within our networks throughout the state, but I think that there are others in communities that are deeply concerned about these issues. Look, when I teach in public health at UCLA, and I frequently hear from both students but also stakeholder groups about the effects of these beverages upon their communities, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of youth who come from multiple spaces and places throughout California where they see how it creates dental caries in children, right? Mm-hmm. Where they see how diabetes has become a significant issue in their families. Mm-hmm. And they, there is a constituency, there are stakeholder groups, and there is a base of people who would be willing to mobilize and activate around this. again, if it helps to tie back into their self-interest and we understand, um, what it is that would motivate both them, but also their neighbors to join this fight.
Okay,
You
so
know,
let me drill down on that, because what you're talking about, when you were started, is these two drivers. One is the impact of the beverage on the health, but the other is the opportunity that comes with money that would flow, the revenue from a tax. We haven't talked that much, so I'm just curious. Is it compelling? Would communities believe that, if this tax was imposed and it raised $1.9 billion, $2 billion a year, half of that almost would go to education because of Prop 48 or whatever it is, and then that would leave $1 billion of investment for communities. Half of that, for the way we've been talking about, is half for community interventions and grants, and then half for prevention. I mean, not prevention. Pardon me. Treatments. So, what kinds of things do you think would be compelling for people in terms of investments in their communities? How would that work?
I think that's a really great question.
Mm-hmm.
One of the criticisms, of sort of the way this SSD tax fight has gone down. One of the criticisms we have is that there really hasn't been a clear and direct benefit to communities who would be most impacted by this tax. And so I think there has to be a compelling enough argument, right? Families care about access to clean and healthy water, right? We're dealing with issues like the Sativa Water District, where brown water and contaminated water is coming out of pipes, right? We're dealing with issues on local schools where facilities have been dilapidated in many cases, and kids want to be able to access clean drinking water on their campuses. And so funding from an initiative like this needs to go directly to improve the lives of people who will be most affected by it. And starting with something like access to water, which is a great thing to work on, I think is really important. I think the other consideration, right, is I talk to different residents who say, they'll put soda, they'll feed their children soda on a regular basis. In some cases, that soda is cheaper than access to water, right? So making sure that we're able to shift the economics of access, I think, is really important. And then also making sure that we make the healthy choice the easy choice, right? That folk can take advantage of and utilize the resources that can come from such a tax to make good, healthy decisions. That there is an ongoing need to ensure that people are educated and understand what effects food and sugar has upon our lives and upon our health, and then making sure that they know how to navigate food swamps, that they know how to cook healthier food when access to fresh fruits and veggies has been diminished because of the economics of their neighborhood or because of concentrated disadvantage. I would also say that we need to focus on children and women and families, because often it's the need for many vulnerable populations and many vulnerable families occurs with young children, right? And it occurs with women who may not be able to access healthier food as well. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking about and putting resources into programs that support the abilities of mothers to provide healthier food options for their kids as well. And then finally, I would say, and I said this, but I didn't say it explicitly, there is a behavioral change component and a need to address the ways in which marketing plays a role in our communities, right? If we're going to shift narratives, we have to shift the messages that have been put out there, right? These messages around sugary sweetened beverage consumption have been so pervasive and have been so ubiquitous in our communities that people can't even see it. They don't even understand how they've been influenced by the beverage industry to make the decisions they're making. And so there's a lot of work here that we have to do, but I think funding needs to go to address the need that is in our community.
What I'm hearing is that the funding has to get down to the neighborhood level, and so the question becomes, how do you get it to the neighborhood level? And that will be, that would be the thing that once the community's articulated, the work that you would do to help communities come to some decisions about what they want to see in their communities. Then the question becomes working with the legislators to translate that into grant programs or investment systems to help those communities actually get the resources that would flow from a tax.
I think that's right. And I think we also have to engage and build an infrastructure with local CBOs.
Yeah.
And
That's
local
community-based organizations, right? Yeah.
Right, that's right. Local community-based organizations and health departments, so that there is a public health, collaborative that ultimately carries out these functions. Right. It cannot be done at sort of the government or institutional level. You got to get into communities with promotores and with peer educators and individuals who are from these spaces. Fund the people who are from these communities to do the work in their communities on behalf of and alongside others in their community.
Well, this is so beautiful because it reminds me of the big concept of the Green New Deal. It's like the transformation has to take place in communities, and that means resources flow because you create jobs. People get improve their economic conditions by being hired at the local level to do this outreach work, do this education work, do this connection or infrastructure work within their communities. I mean, it's so interesting how we're living in this time and space when the old system is breaking down in energy and the old system is breaking down in nutrition and food, and we need to reframe how we invest in those systems to rebuild them. And in doing that, we actually create economic opportunity for people who've been left out for decades and generations.
I think that's right. That's absolutely right. And it requires that we have a focus on racial and economic equity, right? That by creating these opportunities and making sure that there is a return to these communities from this tax or from these fees, we're able to address issues related to poverty, which is fundamentally what this boils down to, right?
Yes.
Because people don't have access to a decent income, they have to make decisions that allow them to survive in the context of their environment.
Yes.
And so poverty as a driver, I think, for health and for access to healthy food, it has to be addressed. And we must understand that a racial analysis and a racial justice analysis is needed in order to target those resources to upend the inequities that we've seen in our food and health systems.
Yeah, that's the great irony of the moment. We have, clearly, we're living in a moment where racism has come to the surface again. It's been there forever, but it's been brought to the surface by the administration. And it seems to me that as ugly as it is in a very definite way, it's also an incredible opportunity to kind of root it out at a deeper level than in the past. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's wishful thinking?
No, I think if I'm really going to go there, I would say that the institutions that we have are based upon sort of a framework that has been around since the founding of this country, right? And that there are fundamental needs. There's a fundamental need to transform the ideologies that uphold these institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there's an opportunity to rebuild the system, rebuild our food systems, rebuild our health systems, rebuild our economic systems with a racial justice framework, we have to completely rethink how these systems came to be in the first place and understand that if we're going to root out any modern form of racism, that we got to, in some cases, start fresh with the way we structure our institutions. Because we cannot rely upon the way we've done things in the past in order to reconcile how we're going to do them in the forward, how we're going to do them in the future, and how we're going to do them moving forward. We have to have some truth telling and truth seeking around these issues in order to address these issues, these concerns around inequity. So when it comes to this SSB tax, for example, right? The reason why it's so important to rely upon and invest in the communities who are most impacted by this is because more often than not, the folk who are in these communities already have solutions and answers to these problems. And they already have thought about how these systems have affected them, both positively and also negatively. They're already, living the conditions that have created the outcomes they see, and they have ideas for how to address those very conditions so that the institutions can change and respond to the needs they have.
God, that's a great... go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just it reminds me, when you said that, it reminded me of Ron Finley and what he did with planting the gardens between the sidewalk and the street. It's like he saw that as a need and he did it, and then that changed the law in Los Angeles.
That's right. And I think in many ways it allows us to upend, institutional practices that may make it impossible for us to thrive in our communities, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it as always. This has been, I think we should end here because I think you've laid out the connection between racial justice, the fight for racial justice, the sweetened beverage tax, the need for communities to be upfront and leading the effort to understand what the solutions are, the real solutions, the workable solutions, the solutions that people will embrace and support. And this is the message that needs to get out for those of us who have been fighting for a long time and failing. If we're going to succeed, we need to do this. So my hope is that we can figure out how to get those resources to you and colleagues who are on the front line to make this happen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I really appreciate, the hard work and support that you've given, Mike, over the years to help move this work along. I think, we have to do this, not only in allyship, but in coalition together to shift the dynamics of power, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. Right. There are a lot of people that have a lot of power that make decisions about, what happens in our communities, but ultimately the power lies in the hands of the people who live in these spaces and who live in these places, and we have to shift those power dynamics.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, thank you very much for your time, D'Artagnan. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, you have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Flipping the Table, a podcast about food, farming, and the future. Flipping the Table is hosted by me, Michael Reed Dimmock, and produced by Patrick Sexton. Our production colleague is Doris Meyer. Our sponsors include Roots of Change and the Public Health Institute. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, or would like to sponsor Flipping the Table, please email us at comments@fthetable.com. That's comments@fthetable.com. Thank you for listening. We've been focusing on great female leaders who are making important changes in the food system. Anna LaPay, the author and activist and now philanthropist, Navina Khanna, who's trying to organize the food movement nationally through the Heal Food Alliance, and Nicolette Hahn-Nyman, who has been writing incredible books and doing great advocacy around the importance of livestock in the food system. And finally, Leah Penniman, who is an author who's written a book called Farming While Black and is the co-founder of Soulfire Farm in upstate New York. Amazing interview about her life and work. These are powerful women shaping our food, and I hope you'll listen. Thanks.